In the annals of naval history, some entries are written in ink and others in salt. In March 1918, a massive steel beast known as the USS Cyclops simply ceased to exist. It was not a small scout or a fragile merchant boat. It was a 542-foot collier, the largest of its kind, carrying 306 passengers and crew. No distress signal was ever sent. No oil slick was ever found. To this day, it remains the single largest loss of life in the history of the United States Navy, not directly involving a battle. But how does a ship the size of 2 football fields vanish without leaving a single piece of debris? Let's look at the records. What's usually overlooked here is the sheer weight of what the Cyclops was carrying. This wasn't just coal in Brazil. The ship had been loaded with over 10,000 tons of manganese ore. This was a critical resource for the war effort, used to harden the steel of American tanks and ships. But manganese is notoriously dense and dangerous. If it shifts during a voyage, it can destabilize a ship in seconds. Records show the ship was heavily overloaded, sitting deep in the water, even before it hit the open sea. Let's stay with what's certain. The Cyclops was already struggling. One of its 2 massive engines was out of commission due to a cracked cylinder. This meant the giant was limping through the Atlantic at a reduced speed, carrying a cargo that was effectively a mountain of loose stone in its belly. Many naval historians point to this as the primary cause of disaster. But then we have to ask, would a structural failure really leave absolutely no wreckage? Normally, lifeboats or wooden deck fittings would float to the surface. But in this case, the ocean was silent. Every ship is a reflection of its captain, and the Cyclops was commanded by one of the most polarizing figures in naval history. George W. Worley was born in Germany as Johann Friedrich Wichmann. During the height of the Great War, his heritage alone was enough to spark suspicion, but his behavior was even more unsettling. Reports from the crew describe him as a man who paced the decks in his underwear, a man who carried a pistol at all times and frequently berated his officers for minor infractions. And this is where it gets interesting. Some contemporary investigators wondered if Worley was a German sympathizer. There were even rumors, completely unverified but widely circulated, that he intended to hand the ship over to the Imperial German Navy. However, the official naval record paints a different picture. It suggests a man suffering from extreme stress, or perhaps a mental breakdown. If the ship was struggling with an engine failure and a heavy cargo, a captain who was not in his right mind could have easily made a fatal tactical error. So we are left with a choice. Was it a deliberate act of treason, or simply the tragic result of a broken man at the helm? The archives don't give us a final answer. On March 4, 1918, the Cyclops made an unscheduled stop in Barbados. Captain Worley claimed he needed more coal, despite already having enough to reach Baltimore. While there, the American consul, Alfred Gottschalk, noted that the ship seemed dangerously low in the water. This is a detail that haunts the investigation. If the ship was already compromised, why did Worley choose to linger? After departing Barbados, the ship sent a routine radio message, "Weather fair, all well." Those were the last words ever heard from the Cyclops. It was scheduled to arrive in Baltimore on March 13th, but the date came and went, and the horizon remained empty. No distress signal, no SOS, ever crackled across the airwaves. This lack of communication suggests that whatever happened, it was catastrophic and instantaneous. But what could sink a 19,000-ton vessel so quickly that the radio operator didn't have time to tap out a single code? Some suggest a sudden rogue wave. Others point to a massive internal explosion. But without a single witness, we are left staring at a blank spot on the map. At the time, the most logical explanation seemed to be the enemy. It was, after all, the middle of World War I. German U-boats were prowling the Atlantic, sinking merchant ships with terrifying efficiency. The theory was simple. A torpedo hit the hull, detonated the coal dust or the boilers, and sent the Cyclops to the bottom. But let's stay with what's certain. After the war ended, the United States government gained access to the German naval logs. They meticulously cross-referenced every U-boat position and every confirmed sinking from March 1918. The result? There were no German submarines anywhere near the path of the Cyclops at that time. Furthermore, no German commander ever claimed credit for the sinking of such a massive prize. This effectively debunks the direct attack theory. However, there is still the possibility of a drifting naval mine. The ocean was littered with them. If an overloaded, structurally weakened ship hit a mine in the dead of night, it could have broken its back and sunk in minutes. But even then, wouldn't there be debris? Wouldn't there be some sign of a struggle? The lack of evidence for an attack is just as frustrating as the lack of evidence for an accident. If we look past the spies and the submarines, we find a more chilling reality in the engineering. The Cyclops was part of the Proteus class of colliers, and it turns out they had a fatal design flaw. The acidity of the coal and the manganese cargo could corrode the ship's internal support beams over time. What's usually overlooked here is that two of the Cyclops' sister ships, the Proteus and the Nereus, also disappeared without a trace during World War II. They were carrying similar heavy cargoes of metallic ore. This suggests a pattern. Imagine a ship with a weakened spine, carrying 10,000 tons of shifting weight, hitting a heavy swell in the middle of the night. If the hull snapped in two, the manganese ore would have acted like an anchor, pulling both halves of the ship down almost instantly. This would explain the lack of radio calls and the lack of wreckage. The ship wouldn't have sunk in the traditional sense. It would have plummeted. But is this a definitive answer? It's a strong technical theory, but it doesn't account for the fact that the weather reports in the area were relatively calm. The ocean was not in a rage. Could a ship really just break apart on a clear night? The archivist must note, while the engineering failure is the most plausible theory, it still requires a degree of speculation. We cannot discuss the Cyclops without mentioning the shadow it cast over pop culture. Because the ship vanished in the region between Bermuda, Miami, and Puerto Rico, it became one of the founding legends of the so-called Bermuda Triangle. Paranormal enthusiasts have suggested everything from magnetic anomalies to extraterrestrial intervention. But let's stay with what's certain. The U.S. Navy does not recognize the Bermuda Triangle as a real geographic or hazardous zone. The archivist views these claims as a way to fill the void left by a lack of facts. When we don't have a wreck, we invent a monster. But the ocean is vast, and the sea floor in that region is jagged and deep, filled with trenches that could easily hide 1,000 ships. The mystery of the Cyclops isn't that it was taken by something supernatural, it's that it was taken by an environment we still barely understand. Rather than looking for portals, we should look at the limitations of 1918 technology. No GPS, no satellite tracking, and a radio system that was easily silenced by a single wave. The mystery may simply be the limits of our own sight. Months after the disappearance, the Assistant Secretary of the Navy, a young man named Franklin D. Roosevelt, officially declared the ship lost. The Navy's final report concluded with a haunting sentence: "There has been no more baffling mystery in the annals of the Navy than the disappearance of this vessel. Only God and the sea know what happened." So where does that leave us? On one side, we have the technical reality, a weakened, overloaded ship prone to structural failure, likely snapped in half by its own cargo. On the other, we have the human mystery, the eccentric Captain Worley, the wartime tensions, and the possibility of a freak accident or sabotage that left no trace. What's usually overlooked is that even with modern technology, we haven't found the Cyclops. It remains a ghost in the machine of history. Perhaps one day a deep-sea submersible will find those two halves of steel resting in the dark, and we will finally have our answer. But until then, the case of the USS Cyclops remains what it has always been, a reminder that the ocean is very large and we are very small. The archives remain open. Thank you for digging through these layers of history with me today. The story of the Cyclops is just one of many where the truth is buried deep beneath the waves. If you found this investigation compelling, consider subscribing to the channel and joining our community of skeptics. But before you go, what do you think? Was it a failure of engineering or a failure of leadership? Until next time, I'm the Archivist.